السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على النبي الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والتابعين لهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Distinguished guests, dear brothers and sisters, this is our immense pleasure to welcome you all to our weekly lecture entitled Privatization of Advocacy of Islamic Banking and Finance. Islamic Economics Association, under the purview of the Faculty of Sharia and Islamic Studies, Kuwait University, is very much pleased to welcome you all to its activities, events, and programs, which usually promote Sharia-compliant finance models and modules, strategies, policies, and contemporary issues. This is to just promote Sharia-compliant models, and also the activities and events cover a wide range of areas in Islamic banking and finance, microfinance, insurance, capital market, equity market, and also principles of Islamic finance, nature of contracts, products, and services provided by Islamic banking. Today, our lecture on privatization of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance will be conducted by Professor Dr. HUMAYON, who is a world-known banking and finance expert, earned fame for his innovative approach to structuring of faith-based and Islamic financial structuring. During his tenure as managing director with Deutsche Bank AG London, he is also one of the most influential opinion makers in the ethical financial services industry today, and who advises fund managers, banks, multilateral institutions, and governments on the matters related with Islamic finance and innovation for financial inclusion. Currently, Prof. HUMAYON is serving as Director General of Cambridge Institute of Islamic Finance. Prior to this, he served as the Director General of Islamic Research and Training Institute of Islamic Development Bank, IDB. With a PhD from Cambridge University and a wide-ranging experience in academy, investment banking, financial advisory, and advocacy, Dr. HUMAYON has initiated a number of projects related with Islamic finance around the world. And we may also, for further information about him, we may Google him, and also we may visit in Wikipedia. So this is our honor to have Professor Dr. HUMAYON today to deliver the lecture entitled Privatization of Advocacy of Islamic Bank and Finance. So please welcome, Prof.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ahlihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. I am very pleased once again to be part of this lecture series. I think I have given 3, if not more, lectures already. And I'm thankful to the organizers for giving me another opportunity to share some of my ideas, thoughts, and observations on a topic which I believe no one has looked at previously. And the title is Privatization of Advocacy of Islamic Banking and Finance. Privatization of Islamic banking and finance. This is something I'm sure a lot of researchers and observers of the industry would have looked into and talked about. Similarly, privatization of Sharia aspects of Islamic banking and finance. This is an area which has been a focus of quite a few academic and popular journal articles as well. When it comes to advocacy, I don't think anyone has looked into it with some kind of in-depth analysis. And I don't claim to present an in-depth analysis in this 1-hour lecture. Rather, I would be sharing some of my observations and some of my own personal experiences in the advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. First of all, I would like to define what I mean by advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. As the name suggests, advocacy means promoting Islamic banking and finance, creating awareness about Islamic banking and finance. And in addition to promotion and creating awareness, of course, creating capacity building or making sure that there are resources available which can help in promotion of Islamic banking and finance in a particular jurisdiction or worldwide. So this is what I mean by advocacy. Basically, being behind the movement of Islamic banking and finance. And the question arises, who are, as individuals or as institutions, which have advocated Islamic banking and finance? When there was no Islamic banking and finance in practice, the earliest advocates of Islamic banking and finance were Islamic economists or economists in general, who later on became known as Islamic economists. And these Islamic economists, they started writing about Islamic economic system and Islamic economic institutions, of which Islamic banking and finance was a focus. So the first breed of advocates of Islamic banking and finance were actually Islamic economists. And in this respect, a body was set up in 1976 when International Association of Islamic Economics was set up. And I believe in 1979, the first international conference on Islamic economics, banking and finance was held in Makkah as well. So the first generation of advocates of Islamic banking and finance were the Islamic economists who, through their writings and research papers, tried to convince the wider stakeholders of viability of Islamic banking and finance as institutions and, of course, on a systemic level as well. When Islamic banking and finance came into being, then there were certain institutions. I would say the first prominent institution was Islamic Development Bank and its subsidiary, which was set up in 1981, 1982, Islamic Research and Training Institute, which is now renamed as Islamic Development Bank Institute. So that was one of the earlier advocates of Islamic banking and finance. And through this organization, Islamic Development Bank tried to promote Islamic banking and finance globally in different parts of the world, especially in the member countries. And this role of ISDBI or ISDB Institute continues. Then we have some national level organizations. And I must say, in this respect, the Malaysian government played a very important role when Bank Negara Malaysia decided to take up the matter of promotion and advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. That was the time when Tan Sri Dr. Zati Akhtar Aziz, who was then governor of the central bank, she very explicitly took up the matter of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance, and a number of institutions were set up in the country. Before that, I also mentioned the role of multilateral Islamic finance bodies like Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions based in Bahrain and Islamic Financial Services Board set up in Kuala Lumpur about 20 years back. And there are some other organizations like General Council for Islamic Banks and Financial Institutions. So these bodies, they have been set up for the advocacy of Islamic banking and finance with some particular focuses on some aspects of Islamic banking and finance. For example, Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions was set up to issue standards, accounting standards, Sharia standards, and later on governance standards and some other ethical standards were included in the domain of AOFE as well. IFSB looks into the regulatory aspects, and it has issued quite a number of standards, regulatory standards for Islamic banking and finance. All these, they are different components of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. And these are by and large conducted within the public sector. Okay. Islamic Development Bank, it's a multilateral institution, but its overall structure is that of a public sector organization, which is the case even for United Nations, World Bank, and IMF as well. They are not owned by just one country or one member country, rather member countries as a whole, they are the stakeholders in these organizations. The likes of IFSB, AOFE, they get funding from the likes of Islamic Development Bank and some other institutions as well. Their nature is very much of a public sector organization. So predominantly, the advocacy of Islamic banking and finance has been in the public sector. Although it started with the private sector movement of Islamic economists. However, once Islamic banking and finance institutions started coming into being, public sector organizations started playing an important role in the advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. And the question arises, or one may ask, whether this role of public sector in advocacy of Islamic banking and finance was effective. I think there is a need to come up with a scientifically or academically rigorous study to see whether this was an effective and influential role played by the public sector in this respect. Other government bodies like the central banks and ministries of finance, they in certain cases have done something with respect to advocacy of Islamic banking and finance, but I am not hesitant to say that in most cases that advocacy role has not been very visible and it hasn't been very effective either, except in case of Indonesia, which is a recent example of advocacy. But even there, Ministry of Finance is not on the forefront. Rather, the president of the country set up an organization which was initially called KNKS. Now it has been renamed to be called as KNEKS. So this is a body, it's an advocacy body, which was set up by the Office of the President with close links with the Ministry of Finance. So KNEKS is a national body which is similar in nature as other multilateral institutions like AOFE, IFSB, and others are. Of course, its focus is purely advocacy and not issuance of any standards, etc. Although in my view, those standards, they come under the definition of advocacy as well. And we would see whether KNEKS has been effective and influential. Probably this is too early to say anything about it because it was set up only a few years back, and its performance in the long run would be assessed to see whether this is going to be an effective platform for advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. Then, as the title suggests, okay, we have to look at some private sector organizations which have come into being to advocate for Islamic banking and finance. If I'm not mistaken, the earliest private sector organization which took it upon itself to start advocating for Islamic banking and finance was Institute of Islamic Banking and Insurance, which was set up in London by an individual. This was a not-for-profit organization. It was not-for-profit organization in its orientation. Otherwise, because this was a private sector initiative started by an individual, so this actually had a company structure. And IIBI actually played a very important role in the advocacy of Islamic banking and finance, not only in the UK, but its effects were felt in other parts of the world as well. Today, we see a lot of training providers and capacity building institutions set up around the world, but IIBI was probably the first private sector initiative which started offering a training program or a qualification which was globally respected by the bankers. Their diploma in Islamic banking and insurance was very highly respected. And at that time, the qualification programs did not exist with any significance. Although, as I mentioned, IRTI, or now ISDBI, was set up in 1982, but they did not have, and even now, okay, they wouldn't have a qualification. Of course, they would help in terms of capacity building the institutions, the governments, the member countries. However, their own qualification in Islamic banking and finance doesn't exist. And this is not their intention either. And I'm not saying that there should be any training program offered by ISDBI. Other institutions like AOFE, in the beginning, they did not have any qualifications. However, now they have quite a few, at least 3 prominent training or certification programs for Sharia auditors, accounting, etc. And IFSB, as of now, till today, they don't have any training program. I must say that I'm not saying that they should have. So IIBI actually was the first private sector institution which started offering qualifications in Islamic banking and finance in the 1990s. Although the likes of BIBF, Bahrain Institute of Banking and Finance, was set up again early 80s, 1981, 82. But that is again an institution set up in the public sector. So if they had any qualifications, they would not fall under the private sector qualifications in Islamic banking and finance. Another qualification which became very popular was the one started by Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment in London. Their qualification, base level qualification, was and still is called IFQ, Islamic Finance Qualification. So this is a public sector initiative, but again, CC, Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment, it gets some funding from the government organizations, but this is a private sector, not-for-profit initiative. So I would like to maintain CC and its Islamic finance qualification as an example of private sector advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. Both the private sector and public sector, they played important roles in capacity building and creating awareness around Islamic banking and finance. However, it is worth asking a question: which one has been more effective, especially in terms of cost considerations? I started asking this question to myself because my own organization, Cambridge Institute of Islamic Finance, and our other companies like Cambridge International Financial Advisory and Advice Consulting before that, we have been involved in advocacy of Islamic banking and finance while being in the private sector. The public sector organizations, in my view, although they had and they still have access to a lot of funds, however, they are inherently inefficient in terms of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. I'll give example of ISDBI. In the 1990s, I still remember visiting IRTI, at that time this was the name, and discussing the idea of starting an yearbook in Islamic finance. And the message I got from the leadership at that time was that, oh, this is very difficult to publish a report, a document on an annual basis. It's a huge commitment. And because I was a young economist at that time, and the person I was talking to was a very senior economist, I did not insist. However, I just thought that if this organization, which has about 35 PhDs, if it finds difficult to come up with an annual publication promoting Islamic banking and finance, then which other organization would be more or better equipped than IRTI? So that was in my mind. And later on, when I joined the industry and started my career in structuring of Islamic financial products, I thought of setting up, or I thought of starting this yearbook in Islamic banking and finance. That was in 2009 when we started working on it. And 2010, we published our first global Islamic finance report. And that was the first private sector initiative to promote Islamic banking and finance through an intelligence report. There were some reports in existence even before that, and I must refer to them. For example, McKinsey used to issue an Islamic finance competitiveness report. which would be launched every year. I think they launched for 4 or 5 years. So every year that would be launched at the annual conference in Bahrain. This was World Islamic Banking and Finance Conference, WIBC, which hasn't been held for last, I think, at least 3, if not 4 years. During COVID, the conference was not held, and after COVID, the organizers, they haven't been able to come up with the IBC, or Islamic Banking and Finance conference in Bahrain. But in those pre-COVID conferences, especially in the early years of 2000, they would have the likes of McKinsey and later on Ernst & Young. They would share Islamic finance competitiveness reports. And I still remember having conversations with those organizations, because I wasn't very happy with those reports, because those reports were actually infographics. There was no English. And when I asked, okay, why don't you produce a more comprehensive report in English language, I was told that they were not very comfortable in writing English. Not in the sense that they were not able to. So basically, they said they were more trained to create infographics, which is a very good way of presenting the information in summary format. So that was my dissatisfaction with that kind of reports that we started Global Islamic Finance Report in 2010, becoming the first private sector initiative in what we would like to call Islamic financial intelligence. That was perceived as a success. As a result of that, the likes of Thomson Reuters, they started issuing their own reports as well, and they continue to issue reports in this respect. Also, another private sector organization, the DAR standard, they issue reports on the state of affairs of Islamic economy, and their focus is on halal sector as well. Another example of private sector advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. And as a result of that, even public sector organizations like IRTI, now ISDBI, they started issuing Islamic finance country reports as well. And IFSB was even before that. They decided to have an Islamic finance stability report, which is an excellent resource. And I have already when it was started, but I must continue to congratulate IFSB for coming up with a very comprehensive document on the state of affairs of Islamic banking and its relevance to the stability of the financial systems where Islamic banks operate. So private sector, in my view, has taken a lot more effective route to advocate for Islamic banking and finance. There are some other examples of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance in the private sector. Euromoney, for example, used to have Islamic finance conferences on an annual basis held in London in Q1 every year. And that was the time when most of the Islamic bankers would like to be in London to attend that conference. Even WIBC, World Islamic Banking Conference, Bahrain, although it is heavily subsidized or supported by the Central Bank of Bahrain, but it remains a private sector initiative. Right? And before it stopped, and I hope that this is only a temporary stop, this had organized about 23 annual conferences. The organization, Middle East Global Advisors, MEGA, they were, or they are still, they are behind WIBC, World Islamic Banking Conference in Bahrain. Another private sector body or private sector player which has played an important role in advocacy of Islamic banking and finance is IFN, Islamic Finance News. So we have IFN seminars, IFN roadshows, IFN country conferences in different parts of the world. And I think, okay, this is a very important private sector initiative to advocate for Islamic banking and finance. My own organization, so we take pride in being probably the only advocacy platform now in the United Kingdom with an exclusive focus on Islamic finance. I mentioned IIBI, but IIBI has seen its glory time. Its peak is over, and a lot of players in the market, they put a question mark on the future of IIBI. I hope IIBI remains an effective platform, but as of now, that's not the case. So we, Cambridge Institute of Islamic Finance and Cambridge International Financial Advisory and the related companies, we have created a global platform for advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. So what we do, and I think this is what other private sector organizations do with some variations. Number one, we disseminate Islamic financial intelligence through our, as I mentioned, Global Islamic Finance Report. In 2010, it was called GIFR, Global Islamic Finance Report only. But in later years, I think for the last 5 years, we have slightly modified its name to call it Cambridge Global Islamic Finance Report to make the brand consistent with our other initiatives. And we also have a magazine called Aspire, which is issued on a bi-monthly basis. Again, this is a purely private sector initiative. We do not apply for any grants, so we don't get money from governments, from multilateral institutions, or any other public sector bodies. Our funding is our revenue. So whatever services we provide to the global Islamic financial services industry and different players therein, that revenue, part of it is used for the advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. So Global Islamic Finance Report, it has right from the beginning been supported by the private players in Islamic banking and finance. These include banks, asset managers, and other players, some universities as well. For example, for the last 5 years, Minhaj University, Lahore, has come on board as a knowledge partner for Cambridge Global Islamic Finance Report. And the Aspire, Aspire, we have been issuing it since 2011. In the beginning, this was a quarterly publication, but now we issue 6 editions of Aspire on an annual basis. And we have experimented during COVID to come up with a few other languages editions as well. In this respect, we have published Aspire in Urdu, in Arabic, and there was another one in Bahasa Melayu, Bahasa Indonesia as well. We have plans to experiment with the Russian edition, with the French edition, and we would like to have one Bangla edition as well. So these 3 editions, they are in the pipeline, and hopefully in 2023, we would be able to bring out, if not all 3, at least 2 language editions as well. So Islamic financial intelligence in the private sector, we offer an example, and I think, okay, this is a highly efficient model of Islamic finance advocacy. We are a very lean and thin organization. We are about 20 staff in total. And the way we have organized ourselves, we are very cost effective. So I would say that about half of our staff, their salaries are less than the one senior economist at ISDBI. Okay. And we, 2010 till 22, on an annual basis, we have published these very big global Islamic finance reports. And I don't think there is any other organization in the world, both in the private sector or in the public sector, which would be able to publish this kind of reports in a more cost-effective manner as us. So in terms of cost effectiveness, privatization model of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance is a lot better than the public sector such initiatives. The likes of ISDBI, the likes of even INSEEF, which is a public sector organization with a focus on capacity building, and we would consider them as an Islamic finance advocacy institution. When you look at their budgets, they're huge budgets. And in terms of output, I'm not quite sure, if we look at the individual products, okay, they would be more cost effective or more efficient in the delivery. I must clarify myself, I'm not questioning the quality of these organizations. I have huge respect for INSEEF and ISDBI, AOFE, IFSB, and all these organizations. I'm sharing my views in terms of economic efficiency. And I would not hesitate to say that all these organizations, they suffer from the inefficiencies which are inherent with any public sector organization. Okay. So if the industry, global Islamic financial services industry, is looking for an advocacy role in a more effective and influential way, especially more cost-effective way, they must look into the private sector initiatives rather than the public sector initiatives. Private sector can play a very influential role with very small amount of money. So privatization of advocacy, probably this is a model the organizations, public sector organizations, and the global Islamic financial services industry should look at. Also, I would like to refer to our Global Islamic Finance Awards, which is a very strong pillar of our Islamic finance advocacy program. So Global Islamic Finance Awards, this is a market-led awards program specializing in Islamic finance and its advocacy. Our top award is called Global Islamic Finance Leadership Award, which is given to our Prime Minister, President, or someone equivalent on an annual basis. And we have given, since 2011, about 11 awards already. And our GIFA laureates, we call them GIFA laureates. So GIFA laureates, they include the likes of Joko Widodo, President of Indonesia. This year, actually, in September, we gave this year's award to Dr. Abiy Ahmed Ali, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. And the President of Pakistan has received an award in 2020. Former Prime Minister of Kazakhstan, His Excellency Nursultan Nazarbayev, is also a GIFA laureate, and so on. So when I compare GIFA Global Islamic Finance Leadership Award with other awards given by public sector bodies, for example, Islamic Development Bank Prize has been given to individuals since the early 1980s. And there is a long list of the recipients. Of course, in the beginning, their focus was on academia, and the plan was to make Islamic Development Bank Prize as something equivalent to Nobel Prize. It hasn't happened. It should have happened. However, it hasn't attained the kind of prestige which was envisaged by the founders, and the later on, this became just one of the prizes. And I must say that this shows the ineffectiveness of the approach as well. IDB prize is given on an annual basis, and it is given in the annual general meeting of the bank, Islamic Development Bank. But the way this was presented in a small ceremony, inviting the IDB prize winner, giving him this one check and probably a medallion, and that was it. Asking later on, not in the same conference, but later on asking to deliver IDB prize winner lecture as well. So there was no media coverage as such. Lately, the things have started changing, but this is a prize which has not stirred the global Islamic financial markets, and people have not been very, I should say, enthusiastic about it. I'm not questioning the idea. It's a wonderful idea. However, the issuing organizations has failed to leverage upon its own size and making it a very respectable, globally recognized awards program. Another one, which is again in public sector, the Royal Award in Islamic Finance, is given by the government of Malaysia. It's a relatively new program, and so far 4 or 5 awards have been given. This year's award was given to Tansiri Dr. Muhammad Daud Bakr, and I was probably one of the first ones to congratulate him on receiving the award. So this is an award which is given to an individual who has contributed to the Islamic banking and finance industry in one way or the other. The approach we have taken, going to a prime minister or president and presenting the award to that individual, that has been very effective in the context of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. I can share a number of stories in this respect, but I'll give you this year's example. We held our Global Islamic Finance Awards in Djibouti in September on the invitation of the president of Djibouti, who has been a GIFA laureate. I think it was in 2018 or 2017, we gave him the Global Islamic Finance Leadership Award. Yes, it was in 2017 in Astana, now called Nur Sultan. So he invited us to hold the award ceremony this year, and our awards committee took the decision to present the award to His Excellency Dr. Abiy Ahmed Ali, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia is a country where Islamic banking and finance has just started its journey. Abiy Ahmed Ali was the prime minister who allowed the establishment of fully fledged interest-free banks. They call Islamic banks as interest-free banks because in Ethiopia, Muslim population is significant, but it's in the minority, about 35 to 38% of the total population. And it's a huge population, about 116 million people in Ethiopia, about 38% Muslims. So this is quite a significant population. So given the population mix and ethnicity mix, it was considered a difficult task to introduce interest-free banking in Ethiopia. But when we gave the award to Dr. Abiy Ahmed Ali, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, he immediately requested us to hold our next Global Islamic Finance Awards in Addis Ababa. We believe that this is going to help the promotion of Islamic banking and finance in the country in a big way. And that is what I mean by effectiveness and influence of a private sector advocacy program. So when it came to the publications, the organizations like us and other private sector organizations, they have been able to produce very effective publications with deep analysis on different aspects of Islamic banking and finance. Public sector organizations, they have not been as successful as one would have liked them to be. And awards, I have given just one award of one example of GIFA. Now, GIFA, a private sector initiative, it takes pride that it has now become a second organization to Nobel Peace Prize Committee. In the roughly about 92 years of history of Nobel Peace Prize, the committee has given the Peace Prize to about 29 heads of state and heads of government. And after Nobel Peace Prize, it's us, GIFA, which has given awards to heads of state or government about 10 or 11 in about 10 and 11 years. And there's no one between us and the Nobel Peace Prize in terms of the numbers. So this is a huge success of a private sector advocacy program. There are some other initiatives. Again, our Cambridge Islamic Finance Leadership Program, which is a private sector initiative. This is so far the only program in the world, an executive program in the world with an exclusive focus on Islamic banking and finance. The organizations which have existed for very long in the public sector, attempting to promote human resource development and capacity building for Islamic banking and finance, despite having access to huge resources, they have not been able to do so. So these examples must provide some food for thought to the stakeholders in the global Islamic financial services industry, where to go to in terms of effectiveness of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. Private sector organizations in this time of digital revolution and social media, they can be a lot more effective than the public sector initiatives of this time. And in future, and of course, Islamic banking and finance must take a futuristic view. So in future, if we want to promote Islamic banking and finance in a cost-effective and impactful manner, this is the private sector, not the public sector. Public sector organizations have done a wonderful job in the past, but the cost of delivery has been huge. We can continue to spend big millions of dollars on an annual basis on the advocacy of Islamic banking and finance in the private sector, but the results would not be inconsistent with the performance of these bodies in the past. So I think privatization of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance is something which global Islamic financial services industry should look into for the promotion of Islamic banking and finance. In this respect, I must clarify that I'm not blowing the trumpet of my organization. I have given fair consideration to other organizations. I have mentioned IFN, I have mentioned Thomson Reuters, and I have mentioned the likes of Middle East Global Advisors and so on, and the DAR standards. I think overall, all these private sector organizations, they present a better model of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance rather than continue to insist on the public sector for the advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. I should also mention a bank like Mizan Bank in Pakistan. It is a private bank, but it has done a tremendously good job in terms of advocacy of Islamic banking and finance in the country. So this is another example of private sector advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. And this, in my view, is the future, because most of the new Islamic banks and financial institutions, they are in the private sector. So private sector organizations, they can serve the advocacy objective of Islamic banking and finance a lot more than the public sector organizations. With this one, I would like to stop. And if there are any questions, I would be only happy to answer. If there are no further questions, I would probably be able to share a couple of other thoughts in this respect.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you for this detailed presentation, and also evaluation of advocacy in Islamic banking and finance and a model of advocacy globally. I think we had a global picture, and also the role of advocacy model in various countries and their impact in Islamic banking and finance in operation. So thank you so much, Prof. And I think if there are any questions or remarks, comments from the guest, you may raise your hand or you may write in the question box. And so request our guest, brothers and sisters, if you have any question or comment, please, Prof is there, ready to respond to you. You may raise your hand and you may speak, or you may write in the question box. I think, Prof, while waiting for the comment or question, maybe you can share with us, with others, any.
Right. I was just looking at the picture, and apparently on my screen, the picture quality is very bad.
Yeah, suddenly.
I don't know.
No, just now it.
Right. Previously, I think it was okay.
It was.
Anyway, I actually wanted to clarify, one point, because always there is a possibility of confusion or misunderstanding. When I mentioned, this is a comparison between private sector and public sector in terms of advocacy. So there is no criticism of any individual institution. And I think this is a very important thing, which I must clarify. I have named some institutions only as an example. And I know that they are providing some wonderful services to the industry and the other stakeholders as well. The associate, like I mentioned, International Association for Islamic Economics. Okay, this in the earlier years, okay, it actually did a tremendously good job. That was the only platform for advocacy of Islamic banking and finance. And in a way, people like me, we are the product of those advocacy platforms. Most of our professors and teachers, they actually were members of International Association for Islamic Economics, and we benefited immensely from them. What I am trying to advocate is the future way forward. These organizations have played a very important role in the past, but as of now and in future, I think private sector can play a more cost-effective and more comprehensively impactful role than the private sector or public sector organizations. Even when I look at the universities, for example, public sector universities, they have been, in the recent past, they have been less effective in advocacy of Islamic banking and finance as compared to the private sector universities or private universities. Last week, I attended an international conference held by Institute of Business Management in Karachi, which is a private sector institution. This was their 6th annual conference. In January, we hold a conference in Lahore by Minhaj University, which is a private sector university. And this is the story elsewhere as well. So private sector institutions, they are a lot more flexible, in terms of budget allocation, in terms of decision making, and so on. In public sector universities, even, I don't know what is the situation on your end, but even arranging for a Zoom call, there is a protocol. This may take few days for you to book a slot for Zoom calls. But in private sector universities, other organizations, this is a decision taken by an individual. So the decision process in public sector organizations is very, very slow. And as a result of that, they are a lot less effective as compared to private sector organizations. Again, I'll give you an example of, last night, the finance minister of Pakistan announced that the government would take the appeals submitted by the central bank and by National Bank of Pakistan against the riba judgment, which was given a few months back by the Federal Shariat Court of the country. Now, there is no response from public sector bodies as of now, because they would take a long time. Or what should be our response, and what kind of language we should use. Organizations like us, before this seminar, a couple of TV channels, they were in my office here, and they were getting my statements and my views on this one. So we can be a lot more quicker. Private sector organizations can be a lot more quicker as compared to public sector organizations in matters like this one, which have direct relevance to advocacy of Islamic banking and finance.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Prof, there is a question from Antara Salah. Have Islamic countries succeeded in downloading the privatization of Islamic finance in a way that satisfies Muslim economic actors and stakeholders?
So the question is, have the Muslim countries succeeded in developing private sector Islamic financial institutions, right?
Yes.
If this is the question, I must say that the governments, the public sector as a stakeholder has provided a lot of money to Islamic banks and financial institutions. If, because you are in Kuwait, I would give the example of Kuwait Finance House. When you look at the shareholding of Kuwait Finance House, there is huge support of public sector bodies. The government sector organizations like OCAF and the Institution for Minority Affairs and so on, they have actually invested in KFH. And the story is true in other countries as well, like a Rajhi Bank, although it's a private sector organization, but it has attracted funding, shareholding from a couple of public sector bodies as well. So the way Islamic banking and finance is being organized, it is a private sector phenomenon with huge support from the government sector bodies. And this is a consistent trend in a lot of countries where Muslims are in majority. Even Malaysia, which is a very much private sector kind of phenomenon. We look at Bank Islam Malaysia. It's a private bank. However, this is an example of what is known as a GLC. It's not, of course, this is not considered as a GLC. GLC means government-linked company. Bank Islam Malaysia has or got money from Bank Islam from BIMB Holdings, which actually got money from Tabung Haji, which is a public sector initiative. So from the shareholding viewpoint, Bank Islam Malaysia is owned by the government. However, this is a private bank listed on the stock exchange in the country. And even some non-Islamic institutions like Maybank, for example, it's a private bank, but it has got shareholding, very prominent shareholding of the government sector. So Islamic banks, they are organized as private sector companies and they continue to benefit the shareholding capital from the governments in a number of countries. Even when we look at DIB, Dubai Islamic Bank, this you look at the shareholding, a lot of money directly has come from the government of Dubai in the capital structure of the bank. So the public sector has, of course, contributed significantly to when it comes to the money aspect. What I was focusing on here is something different. Even, the public sector bodies I refer to, they get a lot of money and they would continue to get a lot of money from the governments. My question was, how effective they are in terms of deployment of that money for the advocacy of Islamic banking and finance.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's clear already to sister. And there is another Sister Sarah. I think she wants to speak.
All right.
Sister Sarah, please welcome. Sister Sarah, please welcome. You may speak now. Sister Sarah, I switch on microphone for you. You may speak now. I think she's not there. So I think that's okay. MashaAllah, Alhamdulillah, we have already completed today's session, and this lecture is recorded in our channel in YouTube. So if you want to rehear the speech, you may refer yourself to our channel and write the topic, and it will automatically come to you. And inshallah, we also like to invite you to our English lecture in next week, Thursday at the same time. So we thank you very much. We thank all the participants, online guests from all over the world, and also in the classroom who join us from the Kuwait University. We thank you very much for joining us in this session. And we thank our staff and brothers and sisters in the association, and especially Director General, Dr. Al Arbeid, for their effort, for their hard work in arranging these wonderful activities of Islamic Banking and Finance. And our special thanks to Professor Dr. HUMAYON DAR for being with us always. Whenever we invite, we call. MashaAllah, this is our privilege and our honor to have you, Prof. And thank you very much for your this wonderful presentation, and also for your effort in promoting Islamic banking and financial models, and also we can say the role models. So thank you, Prof. And if you have any concluding remark, welcome, Prof.
No, thank you very much once again. I should be thankful to you for offering me this opportunity. And it's always a pleasure to talk to the participants through your programs. And I'm thankful to the University of Kuwait and Nada Al-Iqtisad Al-Islami for organizing these weekly seminars or lectures. This is a huge commitment from your side, and you are doing a wonderful job. So with this one, I would like to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everyone.
Assalamu wa rahmatullah, barakallah fiqh, jazakumullah khairan. So we conclude here. Inshallah, see you again in upcoming sessions. So, ila al-liqa ma'a as-salama. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
سعيا لخدمة طلبة العلم والارتقاء بمستوياتهم، يسر نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي الإعلان عن منصة مدارج لإصدار الشهادات، بوابة خاصة لكل طالب. إمكانية التحقق من مصداقية الشهادات، إمكانية تغيير الاسم. كيف تعمل المنصة؟ بعد حضورك إحدى المحاضرات التابعة لنادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي، يقوم النادي بإنشاء حساب شخصي لك، ثم تصلك رسالة إلكترونية عبر البريد تحتوي على رابط المنصة. اسم المستخدم، كلمة المرور. قم بالضغط على رابط المنصة، ثم أدخل اسم المستخدم كما هو موضح في الرسالة، وأيضا كلمة المرور. ثالثا، اضغط على شهاداتي. بعد الدخول إلى لوحة التحكم الخاصة بك، قم بالضغط على شهاداتي. هنا سوف تظهر لك جميع الشهادات الخاصة بك. بإمكانك الضغط على تحميل لتحميل الشهادة. كما يمكنك تعديل الاسم بالضغط على تعديل الاسم الكامل وكتابة الاسم الصحيح. انتبه، يسمح لك بتعديل الاسم الكامل مرة واحدة فقط. الرجاء التأكد من كتابة الاسم الصحيح. بعد ذلك قم بالضغط على حفظ. كما يمكنك تعديل كلمة المرور وإدخال كلمة مرور قوية. تم تسجيلك في منصة الشهادات بنجاح. مرحبا وأهلا بك في منصة مدارج الخاصة بشهاداتك في نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي. شارك الآن وارتق معنا بسلم عضويات النادي. نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي، التأصيل والتميز. سعيا لخدمة من يرد الله به خيرا يفقهه في الدين. ويفهم من الحديث أنه من لم يرد الله به خيرا لا يفقهه في الدين. لتعلم العلم الشرعي في الإسلام فضائل عديدة، ومن أهم الوسائل الحديثة لتدريس العلم الشرعي اليوم التعلم الذاتي عبر شبكة الإنترنت. إذا كنت باحثاً أو طالب علم وحالت بينك وبين طلب العلم الصعوبات والعقبات، إذا كنت موظفاً وتبحث عما ترتقي به في سيرتك الذاتية، إذا كان لديك متسع من الوقت لا تعرف كيفية استغلاله، فإن منصة نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي صممت لأجلك. يقدم لكم نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي أكاديمية افتراضية لطلاب العلم من كل بقاع الأرض. منصة نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي تقدم عددا من البرامج التعليمية الافتراضية المتزامنة والمسجلة، أنشطة تعليمية، بيئة تفاعلية، تقييم دوري، شهادات معتمدة. التحق معنا الآن من خلال منصة نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي التعليمية وترقى في سلم عضويات النادي.
نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي لكل طالب علم يبحث عن التأصيل والتميز.
للتسجيل في منصة نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي قم باتباع الخطوات التالية. أولاً، قم بزيارة الموقع الرسمي لمنصة نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي من خلال الرابط التالي. ثانياً، للانتقال بك إلى الصفحة الرئيسية للتسجيل قم بالنقر على كلمة تسجيل. ثالثاً، بعد الانتقال بك إلى صفحة نموذج التسجيل قم بملء بياناتك الشخصية المطلوبة في هذا النموذج بشكل دقيق وصحيح. رابعاً، سيصلك بعدها رسالة إلى بريدك الإلكتروني تتضمن رابطاً لتفعيل حسابك في المنصة. خامساً، قم بالنقر فوق رابط التفعيل المرسل إلى بريدك لتظهر لك رسالة تفيد بإتمام التسجيل بنجاح. أهلا بك معنا عضوا في نادي الاقتصاد الإسلامي، مع أطيب تمنياتنا بالتوفيق والسداد.